Hello, welcome to No Veto Video. It's good to have you guys with us this week. I'm Catherine.
And I'm Carson.
And this week we're talking about Stakeland.
Stakeland is a movie from 2010, directed by Jim Mickle, and written by Jim Mickle and Nick D'Amici, starring Nick D'Amici, Connor Paolo, Kelly McGillis, and Michael Severus.
Stakeland tells a story about sort of a world gone amok. There's vampires and there's human forces that are sort of degrading society, and into this mix there comes this sort of traveler character, mysterious stranger, who collects along the way a group of ragtag sort of refugees who are all headed north to a vampire-free Canada to hopefully start anew.
So I chose this movie because I've seen it before and thought they did some really interesting things with the plot, and the cinematography was done really well. I have slight disagreements with Catherine. I think the plot was mostly focused on this older, wiser, more rugged and worldly man who takes along this teenager who he then trains to be able to survive in this new hostile world as sort of a father figure mentor.
So where should we begin? What are you wondering about my response?
So I know that's not your takeaway.
It's really not my takeaway. So the main sort of mysterious stranger character is known as Mr. And I know this actor likes to play this type. It's a thing that he seems to enjoy doing. I don't appreciate this type, and I think the interesting things that this movie does is far more about how thin this veneer of civilization is, and that with just the smallest provocation, how some of us will respond with sort of striving towards the good and building community, and some of us strive for power and for license. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a theme in a lot of sort of disaster film, but in this one it certainly becomes very, very obvious.
I can see that. There's a charismatic leader of a religious cult who's...
A thinly veiled reference to the Klan is certainly how I read it.
Yeah, there's definitely elements of that as well, but they're a vampire cult. They basically worship the vampires as this next evolution of humanity.
And I think that's just the story they tell themselves. I think they're... The sense I got from this cult leader, this clan leader, he's even called Jebediah Lovin, which is such a clannish name, is really the idea of like, we appreciate this tool of terror that we get to use to bring people under our control. That the vampires are for them not anything more than a weapon that they can turn loose on the people who don't respond to their particular ideas about how society should be set up. And just to be clear, their idea of how society should be set up involves like sort of an appeal to purity and misogyny. Like, there's a lot of rape and like violence towards women in this film. There's a lot of white supremacy and a lot of racism in this film, and it's really focused in this like thinly veiled reference to the Klan. And yeah, so I think for me the sort of way in which they're using that, like the tropes of a horror monster movie, to talk about how thin under, like how shortly after the normal ways of society breaking down does this sort of force rise to the top. And And yeah, I don't know if it's just like me sitting in 2017 watching this movie is like, you're right. You know, the elements are all right there, and it's just waiting to break free to the destruction of all of us. Or if maybe I would have felt that way if I had seen this when it first came out in 2010.
And I did see it closer to when it came out. I think I saw it in 2012, which was before our current political climate. So that may be a reason that we disagree on what's the primary purpose of the movie is.
I think I'd also disagree with your characterization of Mr. as wise.
Yeah, I don't know. He's certainly wise about many things. He knows not to just rush in and attack the cult if they can skirt around it, for instance. And
he has survival, but not wisdom, I think, is what I would say. So there's this idea of like, yes, this teenager is learning stuff from this guy, but is it a good thing? And I think the character of Mr. wrestles himself with, is it a good thing I'm doing to this child to let him, like, yes, it's good because he'll survive and he'll live and he'll know how to sort of go forward from here, but is it really a good thing that I'm training him to basically be a killer?
Mm.
You know, to become like I am. Reaches a conclusion right at the end of the film. I'm not exactly sure what the conclusion is, but there is certainly this sense of like, well, my work here is done, for good or for ill. And yeah, so I wrestle with this idea of the Mr. character, and how good he is.
Well, I didn't make any judgments when I said that about good or bad, or it was just he is teaching him, he's taken him under his wing. He definitely seems like a mentoring father figure in that regard. Yeah.
And yet there are these other characters who continue to provide softness, which gives me some hope. So
yeah, one entire town that's left alive provides that if you treat the town as a character. And I want to add, while the setting and the backdrop of this is a vampire apocalypse, it's not truly a horror movie. At the end of the day, it's a drama about interpersonal reactions to the events and interpersonal reactions to each other in this new society.
And so for me, at the end of the day, it is a monster movie. It's one of the tropes of monster movies is always, who is the real monster here?
It is.
And so, because for me it hits those pacing questions, at the end of the day, it's a monster movie that has some of this other stuff into it. Honestly, I don't feel like it digs into the characters enough to really be a character study or a character-driven drama.
I don't think it's really a horror movie, though, because the vampires aren't really the focus. They're just a danger, similar to a wilderness survival movie where a bear might be a danger.
Okay, adventure survivor movie then. But I think it hits more of those adventure beats than it hits character beats. And part of the reason for that, for me at least, is they make this choice really intentionally to not dig into these characters and not to have them volunteer a whole lot. In fact, when a character is about to tell a story about how she's feeling and about what's happened to her, the Mr. character says, basically, we don't do history. Which is a really clear, like, character indication, but it also prevents us from really knowing any of these characters in any kind of human way, apart from this sort of immediate response to the current danger.
So I know that you appreciated this movie after you were done watching it. What did you like about it?
I really did like the sort of family of choice that they form at one point. They pick up sort of an avuncular character. They pick up, sort of a little sister. They pick up sort of a mother figure. And it sort of all comes together to kind of create this really interesting family dynamic that actually even encourages this sort of grizzled loner type to be in continuous relationship with people. We know that his preferred way of being is to like one night stand them and not even know their names, or at least that's the front he puts up. But you know, clearly there is more humanity going on even within this like almost lost cause guy. So I really liked the way it tells us about, and social science proves this to be the case, is that actually when disaster strikes, for the most part, humanity finds a way to be together. That there's always examples of places where our hatreds and our fears and our insecurities will rise to the surface. I'm thinking about sort of the stories that come out of Katrina and the disaster that followed the storm, the very human-made disaster that followed the storm. And the ways in which, yes, there were some examples of bigotry and hatred and violence, but there was also just numerous examples of people who took care of one another, who, like, I don't know you, but you're here and you're with me, and so just out of our shared humanity, we belong to each other. This film talked about how that happens. And for me, that was a part of it that I enjoyed. And I enjoyed the interplay of these characters. If we had to spend the whole movie with a taciturn, Mr. and like Martin sort of voiceovering his thoughts because he's not even allowed to talk, or he's been discouraged from talking, I think it would have been an unbearable film.
Yes, and there are definitely movies that present themselves that way.
And I don't care for those at all. No. There are times for dialogue-free movies, but then there's also times for show us your humanity, and the way that we show our humanity is being humane to one another. And it contrasts so starkly with what really is the main antagonist's point of view, which is the idea of might makes right, and I'm the mightiest of all.
One thing I wish they'd focused on, we never actually see how he rose to power. It seems odd to me that none of the people in the cult are contesting him for leadership, or even a group of them. 5 or 6 together could probably have overthrown him relatively easily, but everyone just goes along with what he says. But they don't seem mindless in the way that you would expect, followers who do something unquestioningly should act.
Yeah, I think this very much reminds me in some ways of The Stand.
Yeah.
Without the supernatural elements of it. So take the supernatural elements out of The Stand and take the supernatural elements out of this, and you in both places you've got a story about a group of people who are coming together to try and do community-based things, and a group of people who come together under an authoritarian leader with a charismatic vision of the future that is horrible. And and so in both cases you kind of have this idea of no, his followers know exactly what they're doing. They are following him for probably a variety of reasons, but they're not deluded and they're not mind-controlled. They signed up for this because there was something about this that made them sort of say, yeah, I can tolerate this kind of behavior because it gives me whatever it is that they're looking for. I think a lot of us, and not to go too far back into politics, but I'm a political person, and all of art is political. But a lot of us have been asking the question of how could people go along with the rhetoric that was, shared in the last election, and particularly from Donald Trump's campaign, because, they said, oh no, I guess I'm okay with violence towards women, or I guess I'm okay with, making fun of differently abled people, or I guess I'm okay with racism, or I guess I'm okay with, whatever. For what? It's not like they were deluded, it's just that they decided that they could live with very horrible things for whatever it is that they got out of this. I think we need to stop pretending like, oh, they were duped or oh, they were mind controlled. People signed up and voted and used their vote to do this thing. And I think we see that definitely in these kinds of films too, where we say, no, the followers are following for whatever reason they're following, but they signed up for this.
Yeah, it definitely seems that the followers probably aren't overthrowing him because they agree with what he's doing, and they just don't want the responsibilities of leadership, or they don't want that on their heads. They can just say, well, I was following an order.
Yeah, and so I have very little sympathy for, I mean, these folks mostly stay hooded, and so it's easy for me to not see their humanity.
And I think that was by design.
Yeah, probably for them as well. Like, they needed to not see their humanity either, so that they, it's easier to look in the mirror if you get to wear a hood or a mask. Interesting thing to see now, and it's certainly one of those like eerily prescient works of art that we can go back and say, like, look, this is how we were talking about this kind of behavior even 7 years before we've had this thing come up. Not that there are vampires running around.
Probably. You can't prove a negative.
Probably can't prove a negative.
I think what you were mentioning about the current political climate, I never thought of it that way. And again, I saw this movie years before our political climate. But you raised some really interesting points. I think it does speak to what's going on in our own nation right now.
Yeah. Things are my takeaway as well. But just one more thought, which is this is a part of the countryside I'm not familiar with. Somebody who's lived more in the geographical south. So as they moved further north, like toward Canada, and they're going up like through nominally Pennsylvania and like up through there, just some really lovely countryside. And it gets colder, and you can see the passing of time because it looks like it's getting like through fall and into early winter. There was just this sense of place. It wasn't a place that I could necessarily recognize, but it definitely felt like what it might look like for someone to be heading north into Canada. And I liked that very much. So that's our thoughts on Stakeland. Let us know what you think. You can comment down below. You can find us at novitovideo.com and leave us comments there. So far we are 100% for the response rate. So, come at us, bruh. So let us know what you think, and we'll be happy to respond.
And so we always do this thing called Override, which is keeping with the theme of vetoing. So if you liked this, my Override pick, I've got two of them actually. If you like Nick D'Amici's portrayal of Mister in this movie, he plays a very similar role in Late Phases. So I think you would enjoy that also. If you like some of the character dynamic, Berlin Undead has a very similar character dynamic in a post-apocalyptic setting.
Okay, so for me, my my veto override follow-ups would be, I have one that I've seen and one that's on my own list that I'm embarrassed to say I haven't seen. The first is the one that I have seen, which is A Time to Kill, the John Grisham movie. And then the second one, the one that I haven't caught up with yet, is Mississippi Burning, starring Willem Dafoe and Gene Hackman as two FBI agents sent to investigate the Klan in the American South. Next time on No Veto Video, we'll be responding to Creed, which is available on Amazon. It's a film from 2015 in the Rocky universe.
So thank you for watching, and please subscribe down below.
Alright, thank you, goodbye.
Goodbye.